Think you can just walk away? I'll ruin you." Derek's voice thundered as he burst into the dining room. I sat frozen at the table, my fingers clenching the edges of my breakfast plate. To anyone else, this mansion screamed of wealth and success, pristine marble floors, walls adorned with priceless art. But to me, it was a cage I couldn't escape. To the outside world, I lived in luxury. Inside, I was a butterfly with clipped wings. His words echoed in the spacious room, but I had to stand my ground. "You can't control me forever, Derek." "Oh, you think so?" He leaned in, his face inches from mine. His eyes were cold and calculating. "What makes you think you can survive without me?" His words were a chilling reminder of how deeply I was trapped. Each day was a struggle to maintain composure, knowing full well that Derek's manipulative grip on my life was tightening. We had once been in love, or at least I thought we were. But those days were long gone, replaced by a harsh reality. Derek's anger flared over the littlest things. A misplaced document, a social mishap. Everything was met with his fiery temper. "You think anyone else will take you? You're nothing without me." My heart ached every time he belittled me, yet I found strength in the resolve building inside. My silence was no longer a sign of surrender but a tactic for survival. Still, in moments like these, standing up to him felt like a small but significant victory. He knocked the back of the chair, sending it tumbling to the floor. I didn't flinch, outwardly playing the part of the composed wife. Inside, adrenaline coursed through my veins. "I have connections, you know," he continued, voice low but threatening. "One word from me and you're finished." I took a deep breath, shaking a little. "There was once a time you spoke kindly, Derek. What happened?" "Life happened, Emma," he spat. "You wanted this life, remember?" Once upon a time, I believed in the dream he sold me, a vision of love and prosperity, where my ambitions as a small-town girl from Ohio could flourish in the big city. But over time, his charismatic mask slipped, revealing the domineering tyrant beneath. I stood up, my chair sliding back with a loud scrape. "I wanted a partnership, not a prison." Derek chuckled darkly. "Prison? Is that what you call this? Some would kill for your lifestyle." I picked up the fallen chair, setting it back in place. "What good is luxury if you're miserable?" His chuckles stopped, replaced by a cold, silent stare. "Remember, Emma, you're nothing without me." With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me to collect the shattered pieces of my composure. I looked around the room, etched in marble and gold, yet devoid of warmth. The walls seemed to close in around me, reminding me daily of the life I once dreamed of, now turned nightmare. I drew in a deep breath, thinking momentarily about the days that brought me here. Days filled with hope and ambition, now lost to Derek's control. If only I had listened to my parents. They warned me about the dangers of big city charm masking ruthless intent. Dreams of success led me here, but it was the nightmares that kept me. Now I had to find a way out. I needed a plan, allies, and most of all, the courage to take my life back. This was only the beginning of my stand against Derek, and I vowed I wouldn't back down. As the door slammed shut, I whispered to myself, "This ends now." Moving from Ohio to Chicago was supposed to be my big break. I remember the day I told my parents. My mom, Martha, had her doubts. "The city's no place for a girl like you, Emma. You have everything you need right here." "But Mom," I argued, "there's so much more out there. Opportunities, adventures." Dad gave me a silent nod, a man of few words but filled with the quiet strength that always pushed me forward. "If it's what you want, go for it." The city was as daunting as it was exciting. I juggled 2 part-time jobs while trying to squeeze into the fast-paced world of business and networking. Long shifts and sleepless nights became my routine. I seemed out of place at first, a small-town girl learning to run with the big dogs. Every day felt like a test. But I pressed on, determined to make my mark. Then I met Derek. It was at an upscale networking event, held in one of those swanky hotels where the chandeliers almost outshine the stars outside. I was a bundle of nerves, trying to play the part of the polished businesswoman. Derek approached me with a charm that felt like pure warmth in the cold, glittering crowd. "You look like you could use a drink," he said, handing me a glass of champagne. "First time?" I smiled nervously, taking the flute. "Is it that obvious?" He laughed, a sound that would later haunt me. "A bit, but you've got the passion. I can see it." Our conversations were endless, his words painting vivid pictures of success and partnership. The more he talked, the more I felt seen and understood. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. Derek was a self-made man, or so he claimed, who understood the struggles and triumphs. "Come, let me show you the city," he urged one night after dinner, the lights of Chicago glittering around us. "I want you to see what's possible." Serenades beneath the skyline, gifts, and promises filled the whirlwind romance that followed. I was dizzy with the rush of it all. A small-town girl flung into a bustling metropolis, swept off her feet by a man with seemingly endless resources. One evening, after an exquisite dinner at a five-star restaurant, Derek took my hand, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Marry me, Emma. Let's conquer the world together." I was speechless, my heart pounding. It felt like a dream, too good to be true. "Derek, this is so sudden." He squeezed my hand tighter, his smile softening. "When you know, and I know we're perfect together." The proposal was public, extravagant, and irresistible. My doubts drowned in the sea of his assurances. I said yes, and the rush of that moment made everything else fade away. The wedding was a monument to opulence. Every detail screamed perfection, from the delicate, hand-sewn lace on my dress to the lavish spread of food that seemed never-ending. Family and friends gathered under crystal chandeliers, watching as Derek and I exchanged vows that now felt like a lifetime away. In those moments, staring into his eyes, I believed in the future we built. Yet, not long after, the illusion began to crumble. Derek's charm started to wear off, revealing cracks in his golden persona. The man who once whispered sweet words of love and ambition now spoke with a sharp edge. "You're not trying hard enough," he snapped one evening when I expressed concerns about his latest business venture. "Do you even care about our success?" The cracks widened with each passing day, exposing rifts that words alone couldn't heal. The man who promised to elevate me had slowly begun the descent into a controlling tyrant. But at that point, it was too late to turn back. I glanced at the glittering city outside the window, remembering the hope and excitement that once filled me. Now it felt distant, almost unrecognizable. Nonetheless, a small spark remained inside, a reminder of my past dreams. Little did Derek know, this nightmare would soon turn to his. Life after the wedding was a blur of elaborate galas, high-stakes business meetings, and a ceaseless need to maintain appearances. Derek's charming facade began to slip away, revealing a colder, more controlling side. The man who once promised to conquer the world with me now seemed intent on conquering me. One evening, I was in the kitchen, trying to prepare dinner. Derek walked in, surveying the scene with his usual air of superiority. "That's what you're making, again?" His tone was dripping with disdain. I looked up, my hands trembling slightly. "Yes, Derek, you liked it last time." "Liked it?" he scoffed. "I tolerated it. You should know the difference by now." I bit my lip and turned back to the cutting board, my heart sinking. As I continued chopping, I could feel his eyes boring into me. He loved making me feel small, insignificant. "You never get it right, do you?" he snapped, knocking over a bowl of vegetables. "It shouldn't be this hard? Are you even trying?" His words stung, but I kept my head down. Any response would only fuel his anger. Days turned into weeks, and Derek's behavior worsened. He scrutinized everything I did, finding fault in even the smallest details. When I suggested we see a counselor, he laughed in my face. "Therapy? That's for weak people, Emma. We don't need some stranger meddling in our business." But deep down, I knew it wasn't our business. It was his. His control over every aspect of our life became more apparent with each passing day. One night, I decided to confront him. "Derek, we need to talk," I said as he walked in from yet another late night at the office. "About what?" he asked, not bothering to hide his irritation. "About us. About how things have changed." He threw his jacket onto a chair, loosening his tie. "Changed? How exactly?" "You're different. We're different. You're always angry, always criticizing me. This isn't what I signed up for." Derek's eyes darkened. "Maybe you need to change your expectations. Marriage isn't some fairy tale, Emma. It's work." "I know that," I countered, my voice wavering, "but it shouldn't be like this. We shouldn't be like this." He crossed the room in swift strides, stopping inches away from me. "Listen, and listen well. You don't get to decide how this marriage works. I do. You think you have any real say here? You're wrong." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "This isn't love, Derek," he sneered, his lips curling in contempt. Love is a concept for the naive and the weak. Grow up, Emma. Weeks later, concerned after hearing about Derek's temper during the holidays, my parents called. Sweetie, are you sure you're okay? Mom's voice held a note of worry. I'm fine, really, I lied, glancing over my shoulder to make sure Derek wasn't around. Just busy with life here. Emma, you know you can always come home, Dad added softly. I know, Dad, but this is my home now. My words felt hollow, even to my own ears. As Derek's control tightened, my resolve grew stronger. I began to see the man I loved for who he really was, a master manipulator consumed by his own ego. My initial efforts to fix our marriage became a desperate scramble for survival. Collecting bits of evidence on Derek's unethical business practices became my new focus. I started documenting everything, keeping detailed records of his deals and transactions. It was a small rebellion, a secret act of defiance. Each note, each email saved, was a step closer to my freedom. Every day was another opportunity to observe, to gather more clues about his crooked activities. If Derek was going to keep me in this golden cage, I would use it against him. This nightmare had to end, and I was determined to break free. Derek's financial downfall began slowly, like the rumble of a distant storm. At first, it was subtle. Muted phone calls, late nights at the office. But soon the cracks in his empire grew too large to ignore. Derek, why are these bills late? I asked one evening, shuffling through a stack of past-due notices. He glanced at me, irritation evident. It's nothing, just a temporary setback. A setback? I held up the red envelopes. This is a bit more than that. He snatched the papers from my hand. I said I have it under control. Don't you trust me? His words were laced with anger, but also a hint of desperation. I could see the strain in his eyes, the cracks in his confidence. Of course, I trust you, I lied, choosing my words carefully. I just worry sometimes. Worry about yourself, he snapped. I don't need you poking around in my business. But it was clear Derek was no longer the unstoppable force he once seemed. His businesses began to crumble, and he became increasingly erratic. One night, he came home, a shadow of the man I once knew. His clothes were rumpled, his face drawn. They're pulling out, he muttered to himself, pacing the room. Who is? I asked cautiously. My investors, he spat. Bunch of cowards. Derek, maybe there's something we can do. Maybe if we... Stop, he yelled, throwing a glass against the wall. Just stop. You wouldn't understand. This is bigger than you, bigger than us. I flinched at his outburst, but held my ground. We're in this together, remember? His eyes narrowed. Together? Now you care about together? You think you can help? You're just as useless here as you are everywhere else. His words cut deep, but they only strengthened my resolve. Derek wasn't just drowning, he was dragging me down with him. One evening, as Derek stumbled through another business call, a plan began to take shape. If I could gather enough evidence of his underhanded deals, I could tear down his empire and build a case against him. I started reaching out to people, old friends, former employees, anyone that might help me understand the depth of his deceit. Lydia Green? I said hesitantly into my phone. It had taken me weeks to get a hold of her. Yes, who is this? Her voice was guarded. Emma Larson. We met a few times when you worked for Derek. I need to talk to you about... everything. There was a pause. Why should I help you? Because I know he wronged you too, I said, my voice steady. And because you deserve to see him fall. Lydia hesitated, then sighed. Fine. Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th Street tomorrow at 2 p.m. When we met, Lydia was a wealth of information. Derek has been using company funds for his private ventures, she revealed, shaking her head. He's been hiding it from the board for years. Her eyes flashed with anger. He's ruined lives, Emma, but people are afraid to stand up to him. Not anymore, I said firmly. We gather the evidence, document everything. We bring him down together. The plan was formidable, but my resolve was unwavering. If Derek could manipulate his way to the top, I could surely expose the truth. The next step was to find more allies, people who would help me build the case against him. As I walked away from the meeting with Lydia, a sense of determination washed over me. Derek's empire, built on lies and manipulation, was about to crumble, and I would be the one to watch it fall. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Derek was ruthless, and I would need to be careful. But each step forward was a step toward my freedom, and no matter how tight Derek's grip, I was getting ready to break free. The fight had only just begun. The days that followed my meeting with Lydia were intense. Every moment alone was dedicated to piecing together Derek's downfall. I pored over documents, combed through emails, and spoke with more of his disgruntled employees. One name came up repeatedly: Jake Mathers, Derek's biggest competitor. Meeting Jake for the first time was daunting. We arranged to meet at a small, discreet cafe, neutral territory for both of us. As I walked in, he was already seated, sipping a coffee. He stood up when he saw me, offering a firm handshake. "Emma Larson," he said with a nod. "I've heard a lot about you." "Jake Mathers," I replied, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for meeting with me." He gestured for me to sit. "Let's get straight to it. Lydia mentioned you have some dirt on Derek." I nodded, opening my bag and pulling out a thick folder. "He's been cooking the books, funneling company funds into private ventures, among other things." Jake's eyes widened as he flipped through the evidence. "This is significant. Why are you doing this? I thought you were his loyal wife." I took a deep breath. I was once. But I can't ignore what he's become. He's controlling, manipulative, and he's hurt too many people, including me. Jake closed the folder and looked at me intently. "You want to take him down, and you need my help." "Exactly," I replied. "You have the business acumen and the resources. We can expose him together." "All right," Jake said after a moment, leaning back in his chair. "But know this, if we do this, there's no turning back." "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't ready," I asserted. Jake and I began meeting regularly, forming a strategy. We collected testimonies from former employees, built a case with forensic accountants, and crafted a plan that left no room for Derek to weasel out. Back at home, maintaining a facade of normalcy was painful. Derek's temper flared more frequently as his businesses crumbled. One night, he came home drunk and belligerent. "You think I don't know what you're up to?" he slurred, pointing a shaky finger at me. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "What are you talking about, Derek?" "Spending so much time out, meeting people. Don't think I haven't noticed." He staggered closer, his eyes bloodshot. "I know you're trying to betray me." I swallowed hard, staring down. "Stop being paranoid, Derek. I'm just trying to help." "Help?" He laughed darkly. "You can't even help yourself." His words were a cruel reminder of my supposed powerlessness, but I refused to let him see my fear. "Maybe, if you weren't so busy destroying everything, we wouldn't be in this mess." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. "Careful, Emma. You're treading dangerous waters." That night, I hid the folder with damning evidence in a secure place. It was a risk, having it so close, but it was also a reminder of my mission. I wouldn't let fear deter me. Derek's empire was shaky, and with Jake's help, it would soon crumble. The next morning, I met Lydia in a park, away from prying eyes. "How's the plan coming?" I asked as I handed her a coffee. She sipped gratefully and nodded. "Jake's all in. He's already leaked bits to the media. Derek's struggling to keep a lid on it." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Good. The more pressure, the better. "We need to be ready, though," Lydia warned. "Derek won't go down without a fight." "I'm ready," I said, my voice unwavering. As I walked away from the park that day, I knew we were close. Each step brought us nearer to the moment when Derek would finally face the consequences of his actions. The stakes were high and the danger real, but I was prepared to see it through. For too long, Derek had controlled my life. Now, it was time to reclaim it and watch him fall. The tension in the house was suffocating. Derek's paranoia reached new heights with each passing day. He was convinced that enemies surrounded him, but he never suspected the biggest threat was right under his nose. One evening, I received a text from Jake. "Ready for tomorrow?" I typed back quickly, "Yes." The plan was set in motion. Tomorrow, we would expose Derek at a critical board meeting. I just had to survive the night. Derek was at his desk, a scowl etched on his face. Papers were strewn about, and the air was thick with his frustration. "Damn it!" he shouted, slamming a file shut. I approached cautiously. "Anything I can help with?" He looked up, eyes burning with anger. "Unless you can make $500,000 appear out of thin air, no?" I stayed silent. Offering advice would only enrage him further. I retreated to the kitchen, my heart pounding with anticipation. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a professional outfit that exuded confidence. I needed every ounce of strength for what lay ahead. Derek eyed me suspiciously as I grabbed my bag. "Why so dressed up?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "Board meeting," I replied simply. I thought I'd look the part." He grunted, not entirely convinced, but too preoccupied to dig further. I left the house, trying to keep my breath steady. Jake met me in the lobby of Derek's company building. "You ready?" he asked, his face serious. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, my voice steady despite the nerves roiling inside me. We walked into the boardroom together. The room was filled with powerful men and women, all waiting for Derek. Moments later, Derek barged in, oozing his usual arrogance but with a hint of desperation lurking beneath. "All right, let's get started," he commanded, dropping into his seat at the head of the table. The meeting unfolded. Derek laid out his usual bravado, attempting to mask the deteriorating state of his empire. But the murmurs and discontent were barely concealed among the board members. Jake stood up, interrupting Derek. "Before we move forward, there's something critical we need to discuss." Derek's eyes narrowed. "And what would that be, Jake?" Jake glanced at me, then turned to the rest of the board. "Derek has been hiding significant financial discrepancies. We have concrete proof." Derek laughed, a hollow sound. "Dad, this is absurd. Just another attempt by a rival to discredit me." I stood up, my hands slightly trembling, but my voice firm. "It's not absurd, Derek. It's the truth, and we have the documents to prove it." I handed out copies of our evidence: false transactions, misappropriations, and unauthorized deals. The room erupted into chaos, voices shouting over each other. Derek's face went pale, then red with fury. "You traitorous bitch!" he screamed, lunging toward me. Two board members restrained him as I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake raised his voice above the din. "The evidence speaks for itself. Derek has not only jeopardized this company, but also the livelihoods of everyone involved. It's time to vote on his removal." Derek struggled against the hands holding him back, his eyes filled with rage. "You think you can do this to me? You think you'll win?" The vote was swift and decisive. The board members, tired of Derek's tyranny, chose unanimously to oust him. As they escorted him out, his threats echoed through the hallway. "You haven't seen the last of me, Emma. I'll destroy you." But his words fell on deaf ears. I knew that this was just the beginning of his downfall. Jake approached me, a satisfied smile on his face. "You did it, Emma. We did it." I nodded, the weight of what we'd just accomplished settling in. "Thanks to you and everyone who believed in bringing him down." As I walked away from the building, a sense of liberation washed over me. Derek's empire was crumbling, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. The journey wasn't over. Derek would try to strike back, but I was ready. I had found my strength, and I wasn't going to let it go. The wind had shifted, and this time it was in my favor. The aftermath of Derek's ousting was a whirlwind. News spread quickly, and his once loyal supporters jumped ship. It was like watching a dam break. All the lies and manipulations he'd built over the years came crashing down. Derek didn't take it quietly. He stormed into our house that night, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "You think this is over?" he bellowed, slamming the door behind him. I stood my ground, calm but alert. "It is over, Derek. You've lost." He moved closer, his face twisted in anger. "You think you're tough now, huh? Think you can just ruin me and walk away?" "I'm not the one who ruined you," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You did that to yourself." With a snarl, he grabbed my arm, yanking me toward him. "You don't know who you're messing with. I will destroy everything you have." I met his eyes, unflinching. "You already tried, and you failed. It's time to let go, Derek." His grip tightened painfully before he shoved me away. "You'll regret this," he hissed, storming out again. The following days were tense, as Derek tried to cling to the remnants of his power. But every attempt to salvage his reputation was met with resistance. The evidence we'd revealed was too damning, and the board refused to reinstate him. Legal actions were looming over him like a dark cloud. In the meantime, Jake and I worked tirelessly to ensure that the transition of power was smooth. We spent long hours at the office, reviewing contracts, meeting with stakeholders, and planning the company's future. "You did an incredible job," Jake said one night after a particularly grueling day. "Thanks," I replied, exhaustion evident in my voice. "It's been worth it, though." He smiled, his admiration clear. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Emma." Those words stuck with me as I navigated through the chaos. With Derek out of the way, I started to rebuild my life. I found a small apartment downtown and moved out of the mansion that once felt like a prison. Jake and Lydia became more than just allies, they were friends. Lydia was a constant source of support, and Jake's presence was a grounding force. One evening, as we wrapped up another meeting, Jake looked at me thoughtfully. "You should come by the new office," he offered. "See the changes we're making." "I'd like that," I agreed, feeling a sense of closure as I looked ahead. Derek's threats didn't disappear completely. He made a few desperate attempts to contact me, but I never responded. Legal proceedings took their toll on him, and he slowly faded from public view. His fall from grace was complete. In my new apartment, I began to plan my next steps. Freedom felt strange, yet exhilarating. I pursued business ventures that I had put on hold for years, reconnecting with my passions. One afternoon, while setting up my new home office, I received a message from an unknown number. The words were simple. "He's hit rock bottom." I stared at the screen, the finality of it sinking in. Derek was done. There was no satisfaction in his suffering, only a sense of finality. I chose not to reply, deleting the message instead. Reflecting on everything, I realized that revenge hadn't been my true goal. It was freedom, pure and simple, the power to live my life without fear and to pursue my dreams without restraint. I called my mother, eager to share the news. "Mom, it's over. Derek's done." There was a pause before her voice, filled with relief, responded. "I'm so proud of you, Emma. You've come such a long way." "I have," I agreed, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "And I'm just getting started." As I hung up, I looked around my new home, feeling a sense of peace. This was my space, my life, my future, and I was ready to embrace it with every ounce of strength I had found within myself. The fight was over, but the journey had just begun. Setting up my new business felt like planting a garden after a long winter. The seeds of my ideas, once dormant, were now bursting with potential. With the help of Jake and Lydia, I rented a small office space and began assembling a team. The air buzzed with excitement and purpose. One evening, I was settling into my new place when Jake dropped by. He handed me a bottle of champagne. "To new beginnings," he said, popping the cork. We clinked glasses, the bubbles sparkling in the dim light. "To new beginnings," I echoed, savoring the taste of freedom. Lydia came in, carrying a stack of papers. "We've got the final contracts for the new client," she announced. "This is huge, Emma." I looked over the documents, disbelief mingling with pride. "Unbelievable. We're really doing this." "Yes, we are," Jake said, his voice full of conviction. "You're driving this ship now. How does it feel?" "Terrifying and thrilling," I admitted, but in the best way possible. Our company launch was a modest event, held in the very office where I had planned Derek's downfall. It seemed fitting. Friends, clients, and family gathered, filling the space with laughter and chatter. Jake raised his glass. "Here's to Emma, for her courage and vision. May this venture be everything she's dreamed of and more." Cheers erupted, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek. "Thank you all for being here," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This wouldn't be possible without your support." After the event, I found a quiet moment on the terrace, looking out over the city that had once seemed so intimidating. Lydia joined me, a smile playing on her lips. "Thought you might need a breather," she said, leaning on the railing. "Yeah, it's a lot to take in," I confessed. "You did it, Emma. You faced your demons and came out stronger." "I couldn't have done it without you and Jake." "Speaking of Derek," she said, her tone shifting. "Did you hear? He's filed for bankruptcy." I nodded. "I saw the news. It's surreal." "Does it bother you?" she asked, eyes searching mine. "No," I replied slowly. "It doesn't. He made his choices, and now he's dealing with the consequences." Lydia's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. "Looks like Jake's causing a commotion inside again. I better go check on him." We shared a laugh as she went back inside. Alone again, I let the silence wash over me. I had come full circle, from a lost and controlled woman to someone who had regained power and purpose. A few days later, as I was going through some old boxes, I found a note from Derek. It was from the early days, filled with promises of forever. I read it one last time and then tore it up, letting the pieces fall into the trash. Just as I was about to leave the office that evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. I hesitated but answered it. "Emma?" The voice was weak, strained. "Yes, who is this?" "It's Derek." My heart skipped a beat. What do you want, Derek? I need help, he stammered. I have nowhere left to turn. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of pity and resolve. Derek, I can't help you. You need to find a way to help yourself. There was a long pause. Please, Emma, just hear me out. I've heard enough, I said firmly. Goodbye, Derek. I hung up, feeling a sense of closure. The following day, I finalized plans for our new project, excitement bubbling within me. Jake and Lydia joined me in the office, their energy infectious. Ready to take over the world? Jake joked. Absolutely, I replied, confident and sure. As we gathered around the table to strategize, I knew this was just the beginning. I had faced my past and forged a future filled with promise. The unseen chains that once bound me were finally broken, and there was nothing holding me back anymore. The sun set behind the city skyline, casting a warm glow over our plans and dreams. Together, we were unstoppable, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The shrill beep of the smoke detector jolted me awake. I bolted out of bed and ran to Lucas's room, heart pounding. Thick plumes of smoke billowed out from under his door. I barged in, waves of heat hitting me. Lucas was sitting up in bed, crying and coughing as acrid fumes filled the room. Lucas, are you okay? I yelled over the piercing alarm. He reached for me, tears streaming down his soot-smudged cheeks. Scooping him into my arms, I dashed out of the room. Jonah lounged in the hallway, an empty popcorn bag and can of butane at his feet. He watched us with amusement as I frantically patted Lucas's back, trying to soothe his hacking coughs. What did you do? I demanded, glaring at my 17-year-old stepson. Lucas wailed, burying his face in my shoulder. Jonah smirked. Chill out, it was just a prank with some smoke bombs. The kid needs to toughen up. Fury boiled inside me. He's 6 years old. You could have seriously hurt him. Eek. Jonah snickered. Don't be so dramatic. It was a harmless joke. He whipped out his phone and started recording us. I wanted to slap that smug look off his face, but Lucas was trembling in my arms, his safety my priority. I carried him outside into the cool night air, rubbing his back gently. It's okay, baby. Just breathe, I soothed. After a few gulping breaths, his cries tapered to whimpers, but he still clung to me like a lifeline. My blood boiled. This was the last straw. Ever since I married Theo 3 years ago, gaining an insolent teenage stepson in the process, Jonah's pranks had grown increasingly menacing. Lucas was his favorite target. Just last week, I'd found Lucas's favorite stuffed animal, gutted and hung from the ceiling fan, the mutilated fluff strewn across his bedroom. Jonah had dismissed it as childhood fun and games when I confronted him. Theo always excused Jonah's behavior, calling me oversensitive. Boys will be boys, he'd say with an indifferent shrug, but this felt different, crueler. Jonah sidled up, phone extended as he recorded us. "Ow, is little Lucas scared?" he taunted. Lucas whimpered and hid his face. I tightened my arms around him. "Get away from us," I snapped at Jonah. "Haven't you tormented him enough?" Jonah's lip curled. "I was just messing around." God, learn to take a joke. My hands shook with anger. I wanted to knock that phone out of his hand and wipe that smug look off his face. But Lucas needed me. I carried him inside, throwing a vicious glare at Jonah. We're not finished here. After settling a sniffling Lucas in my bed and checking for any signs of smoke inhalation, I stormed back outside. Jonah lounged against the porch railing, chuckling over his phone, probably already posting the video online to further humiliate Lucas. "Just what the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. He glanced up with a casual sneer. "It was a prank. Don't get your panties in a twist." "A prank? You terrified a 6-year-old boy, filled his room with smoke." Jonah rolled his eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. Can't you take a joke?" I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "This isn't funny. Your bullying has to stop. Do you hear me?" He let out an exaggerated yawn. "Don't tell me how to live my life. You're not my mother. As long as you're under my roof, you'll show Lucas respect." I held his challenging stare. "If this continues, there will be consequences." Jonah's lip curled in a derisive sneer. "Ooh, I'm so scared. What are you going to do? Ground me?" He laughed mockingly. Fury boiled inside me, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I turned on my heel and went back inside to comfort Lucas, knowing this was far from over. Jonah's cruelty demanded retribution. If Theo refused to discipline his son, then I would handle this my way. The next morning, I recounted the smoke bomb incident to Theo over breakfast. He sat sipping his coffee, shrugging indifferently, as I described Jonah's malicious prank. "Boys will be boys," he said dismissively. "I'm sure Jonah didn't mean any real harm. He just wanted to have some fun." I stared at him in disbelief. "Fun? He terrified a 6-year-old, filled his room with smoke." Theo waved his hand. "You're overreacting. Lucas needs to toughen up." My anger surged. I pointed an accusing finger at him. "This is your son we're talking about. Aren't you going to discipline him?" Theo's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Don't tell me how to parent my own kid. If I talked to you that way about Lucas, you'd have my head." I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my frustration. Ever since I married Theo, he'd undermined my authority with Jonah, encouraging his son's insolence. Things were only getting worse. "Lucas won't sleep in his own room now," I said evenly. "He's terrified Jonah will hurt him again. As his father, you need to take action here." Theo drained his coffee and stood up. "I'm late for work. We'll talk about this later." He pecked my cheek and headed out the door, avoiding my gaze. I wanted to scream. Lucas was suffering while Theo stuck his head in the sand. He always made excuses for Jonah's behavior, but this had gone too far. After dropping Lucas at school, I called my friend Alicia. I confided my concerns about Jonah escalating his bullying. "That sounds serious," she said. "Can Theo set some boundaries?" I sighed. "Theo refuses to discipline him. He undermines me whenever I try to curb Jonah's behavior." "Yikes, that's a red flag," Alicia said. "Have you considered family counseling?" The suggestion rankled me. Why should Lucas be subjected to therapy because of Jonah's cruelty? As his mother, it was my job to protect him. If Theo wouldn't act, I needed to take matters into my own hands. A seed of an idea began to form. Theo's lackadaisical parenting had enabled Jonah's reprehensible behavior for too long. It was time for me to push back, to finally hold both of them accountable. When Lucas came home, he seemed shaken. With some gentle prodding, he confessed that Jonah had cornered him at recess, whispering chilling threats about their next prank. My blood boiled. This had to stop. That night after Lucas was asleep, I confronted Theo again. "We need to send Jonah to counseling, set firm boundaries." He threatened Lucas again today. Theo didn't even glance up from his computer. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Lay off the kid." I slammed my hands on the desk. "Why are you ignoring this? He's tormenting Lucas." Theo's glare chilled me. "I won't tell you again. Back off." The finality of his words stunned me. In that moment, I knew our marriage was over. Theo would always put Jonah first, no matter what cruelty he inflicted. Fine, I thought. If Theo refused to protect Lucas, then I would. It was time to take matters into my own hands. No more pleading or idle threats. If I wanted to put an end to Jonah's bullying for good, I needed to outmaneuver them both. I lay awake planning that night, cold purpose flowing through me. I would beat Theo and Jonah at their own game. Justice would be served. The sound of shouting jolted me from my thoughts. I was volunteering in Lucas's classroom when raised voices echoed from down the hall. Exchanging puzzled glances with the teacher, I stepped out to investigate. At the end of the corridor, a crowd had gathered. Drawing closer, I realized the commotion was coming from the principal's office. "Absolutely unacceptable behavior," an irate father bellowed. Principal Collins tried placating the man, but he angrily brushed her off. "My son's got a black eye thanks to that punk." My breath caught. It didn't take a genius to know who the father was referring to. Sure enough, a sullen Jonah slouched in one of the office chairs, glaring defiantly as the man continued shouting. Principal Collins noticed me lingering in the doorway. "Arya, perhaps you could provide some insight into this unfortunate incident," she said delicately. I averted my gaze from Jonah's defiant stare. "I'm afraid I don't know what this is regarding." The irate father whirled on me. "That hooligan of yours attacked my boy in the parking lot this morning, punched him right in the face." I felt Jonah's glare boring into me. Keeping my expression neutral, I turned to Principal Collins. "I'm very sorry this happened, but I don't see what this has to do with me." The man's face reddened. "Don't play dumb. You need to keep that punk on a tighter leash." He jabbed an accusatory finger towards Jonah. Maintaining my composure, I firmly stated this was an issue between the two boys. I avoided meeting Jonah's stare, refusing to be manipulated by him anymore. After diffusing the situation, I returned to Lucas's classroom. But inwardly, my mind raced. Clearly, Jonah's bullying had not only escalated, but gone public. I needed to take action before Lucas became his next victim at school. That afternoon, I confronted Theo, urging us to present a united front on discipline. But true to form, he refused to even discuss the incident at school today. "It's none of our business," he said indifferently. "Let the principal handle it." I gaped at him. "Jonah assaulted another child. We need to intervene before this escalates." Theo turned on me, eyes blazing. "You always undermine my parenting, overstepping your bounds with my son." He jabbed his finger at me. "Jonah is my responsibility, not yours." His words cut me deeply. I fought to keep my voice steady. Lucas's safety is my priority. If Jonah is bullying others, it's only a matter of time before he targets Lucas again. Theo crossed his arms. "You're being paranoid. Lucas needs to toughen up and handle things himself." I stared at him in disbelief. He's 6 years old. Jonah is practically an adult. Why are we subjecting a little boy to his abuse? "That's enough," Theo shouted. "I won't have you question my parenting anymore. Stay out of matters with Jonah." He stormed off, leaving me shaking with frustration. Once again, Theo refused to acknowledge the severity of Jonah's behavior. He was delusional, blinded by his loyalty to a son who refused any accountability. Meanwhile, Lucas was suffering, his innocence being chipped away by Jonah's malicious actions. If Theo wouldn't protect Lucas, then the duty fell to me. After today's confrontation at school, it was clear this dysfunction couldn't be fixed from within our broken home. I needed to look for justice elsewhere. I awoke to muffled sobs coming from Lucas's room. Heart clenching, I rushed down the hall to check on him. I found Lucas curled up on the floor, hugging his knees as he cried. Shredded paper was strewn all around him, the remnants of his beloved comic book collection. "Lucas, what happened?" I asked gently, sitting down and pulling him into my lap. He buried his face in my shoulder. "Jonah came in and ripped up all my comic books," he whimpered. I stiffened, stroking his hair as I surveyed the destruction. Jonah had decimated Lucas's prized possession, leaving the colorful scraps littered across the carpet. There, it'll be okay," I soothed, while rage burned inside me. This had Jonah's cruelty written all over it. Just then, Jonah's mocking voice sounded from the doorway. "Ah, is baby Luca crying over his stupid comics?" Lucas shrank back against me. I glowered at Jonah, instinctively tightening my protective hold. "That's enough. Just leave us alone." Jonah smirked, leaning against the doorframe. "Those kitty comics were dumb anyway. Luca needs to grow up." Blood pounded in my ears. "You had no right to destroy his belongings. Get out!" "Make me," Jonah sneered. "Don't tell me how to live my life." I trembled with rage. This insolent punk had the audacity to torment Lucas right under our roof. I wanted to slap that smug look off his face. Jonah laughed coldly. "God, you two need to lighten up. They're just stupid comics." He sauntered away, whistling mockingly. My fists clenched. I had to get Lucas away from here, somewhere Jonah couldn't terrorize him. Over the next week, Jonah's bullying escalated. Menacing texts, destroyed toys, callous verbal abuse. Lucas was subjected to it all. My heart broke watching my sweet little boy become more withdrawn and fearful. Meanwhile, Theo continued making pathetic excuses. "It's just normal sibling rivalry," he claimed. "Lucas needs to toughen up." But the final straw came late one night when I discovered Lucas's beloved goldfish, Bubble, belly up in his tank. Scrawled on the tank in red marker were the words, "Snitches get stitches." It didn't take a genius to deduce the culprit behind this vicious threat. I'd had enough. Theo refused to protect Lucas, so it was up to me to take matters into my own hands. The next day I withdrew a large sum of cash from my personal savings account, money Theo knew nothing about. For weeks now I'd been compiling evidence documenting Jonah's reprehensible behavior and Theo's enabling complicity. I tucked the cash safely away, finalizing my plans. That night I confronted Theo one last time, pleading for us to present a united front with discipline. He reacted with his usual indifference laced with disdain for my parenting concerns. "I won't tell you again," he warned. "Let me handle my own son." He stormed off, leaving me with icy resolve. Fine, I thought. I'll handle this my way. Lucas had suffered long enough while Theo stuck his head in the sand. His loyalty would always lie with his bully of a son. Well, not anymore. I was done being gaslighted and undermined. Lucas's innocence was being stripped away by the day under this toxic roof. If Theo refused to act, I would. It was time for me to take back control and finally put an end to this dysfunctional household. No more playing nice or following the rules. Justice would be served, one way or another. Over the next few weeks, I discreetly gathered evidence of Jonah's bullying and Theo's enabling behavior. I compiled a dossier of photos documenting Jonah vandalizing Lucas's belongings, screenshots of threatening texts, and even audio recordings of their vicious verbal abuse. I also started tracking Theo's movements, keeping a detailed log of his activities. He claimed to be working late most nights, but I suspected another motivation. My suspicions were confirmed when I followed him one evening to a seedy casino. So while our savings dwindled from Jonah's expensive gadgets and clothing, Theo was pissing away money gambling. Armed with concrete proof of their deception, it was time to put my plan into action. I withdrew the last of my personal savings I'd been hiding from Theo, gathering essential documents and retaining a lawyer on the down low. When the day came, I wanted to be ready for a clean exit with Lucas in tow, but I needed a catalyst first, something to publicly expose both Theo and Jonah's deceit in an irrefutable display. The time had come for consequences. The perfect opportunity arose a few weeks later at Thanksgiving. Both our families would be gathering for the holiday meal, the ideal audience for what I had in mind. I made sure Lucas stayed by my side the entire afternoon, protecting him from Jonah's torments. Right on cue, as dinner concluded, Jonah made a snide comment about Lucas wetting the bed the other night. Lucas's lip trembled at the callous humiliation in front of our whole family. It was time for the curtain to drop on this charade. I plugged my phone into the TV and began playing the video I'd compiled documenting Jonah's relentless bullying. "What is this?" Theo demanded, reaching for the remote. I smacked his hand away, increasing the volume. "This is the truth." For 10 excruciating minutes, our families witnessed Jonah's despicable behavior via the photos, videos, and screenshots I'd collected. By the end, tears were streaming down Lucas's face. Theo looked on in shock, rendered speechless. When the video ended, I calmly ejected my phone and slipped it into my pocket. Stony silence engulfed the room. You could hear a pin drop. Theo found his voice first. "How could you ambush us like this?" His face reddened with embarrassment and fury. I met his gaze coolly. "Don't blame me for exposing the dysfunction you've enabled under your roof." Murmurs arose from our gathered family. Lucas clutched my hand tightly. I gave a gentle, reassuring squeeze before turning my glare on Jonah. He pointed an accusing finger at me, sneering, "You psycho bitch!" Gasps erupted from around the table. Lucas buried his face in my shoulder. I maintained icy composure. "This charade ends today. I'm filing for divorce and sole custody." Theo shot to his feet. "Over my dead body, Jonah is my son!" "Perfect." I reached into my handbag and retrieved the manila envelope containing my evidence of Theo's gambling addiction and reckless spending. "Not when the court sees how you've endangered Lucas by enabling your son's violence," I said. More murmurs broke out as I revealed Theo's gambling habits and discretionary spending. My in-laws regarded me with dawning respect. Theo glared at me with impotent rage. "You deceitful snake! How dare you humiliate me like this?" I slammed my hands on the table, rattling the dishes. "How dare you subject Lucas to abuse while you secretly gamble away our money?" The room exploded into chaos, both families shouting. Lucas clung to me, trembling. In the pandemonium, I quietly slipped away with my son in tow, ready to start a new life far from this toxic household. Justice had been served. I finally reclaimed control after years of manipulation from Theo and Jonah. By exposing their deceit, I secured freedom and safety for myself and my son. The time had come for a new beginning. In the weeks following Thanksgiving, my life changed drastically. I filed for divorce from Theo and obtained a restraining order against Jonah. After years under their toxic roof, Lucas and I moved across the country to start fresh. It felt liberating finally breaking free from that dysfunction. But the fight wasn't over yet. I still had a custody battle looming against Theo, and knowing him, he wouldn't let go of Lucas without a war. Sure enough, Theo sent threatening emails declaring he'd fight me to the grave for custody. I braced myself for a bitter clash in family court. This time, I had right on my side. The day of our hearing arrived. Dressed in my best suit, I held Lucas's hand tightly as we entered the imposing courtroom. Theo sat at the front table wearing an arrogant smirk that made my blood boil. All rise for the Honorable Judge Collins, called the bailiff. I squeezed Lucas's hand gently as we stood. Today, justice would finally prevail. Judge Collins peered over her spectacles. This hearing is to resolve the matter of custody for minor child Lucas Walker, as well as the division of assets between Arya and Theodore Walker. Are both sides ready to proceed? Yes, Your Honor, I spoke clearly. Theo nodded, glaring daggers at me. For the next few hours, we presented evidence and testimony supporting our respective sides. I recounted numerous incidents detailing the abuse and endangerment Lucas suffered under Theo's roof, providing recordings and statements as proof. In contrast, Theo's case relied solely on arrogant entitlement, insisting blood relation alone made him most fit as a father. He cut an increasingly flustered figure, bravado melting under the onslaught of facts I presented exposing his parental negligence. Finally, Judge Collins held up a hand for silence. I believe I've heard sufficient testimony to reach a decision. She peered over her glasses at Theo and I. In the matter of Lucas Walker, full legal and physical custody is hereby granted to Arya Walker. Elation surged through me. Yes, I cried out, while Theo shouted in protest. The judge's gavel silenced him. Furthermore, I am granting Arya Walker's request for child support from Theodore Walker in the amount of $1,200 monthly until Lucas turns 18. Theo's face turned an ugly purple shade. This is outrageous. You can't do this to me. Judge Collins stared him down. You subjected an innocent child to abuse by enabling a violent environment. Consider yourself lucky you aren't also facing criminal charges. Theo pointed a trembling finger at me. You'll pay for this, I swear. The bailiff stepped forward. Sir, that sounded like a threat. I must ask you to take your seat. Sinking back down, Theo buried his face in his hands. I maintained a dignified composure, determined not to sink to his level. I had taken the high road every step, presenting only facts and maintaining grace under pressure. In the end, justice spoke for itself. As Theo was escorted from the courtroom, Judge Collins gave me an approving nod. I scooped Lucas into my arms, showering his face with kisses. We had triumphed over deceit and abuse, securing a peaceful life for ourselves far from toxic influences. Good had prevailed. In the following days, I savored sweet victory. Reports came in of Theo sinking further into debt now that I had cut him off from my savings. Meanwhile, Jonah had been arrested for assaulting a classmate and was now facing criminal charges plus mandatory therapy. His reign of terror had finally ended. Lucas displayed resilience, bouncing back now that he was safe from harm. I enrolled him in a wonderful new school where he made friends and even joined an arts program. Each day the shadows of his past faded a little more. As for me, I relished this fresh start. The righteous satisfaction of exposing Theo and Jonah's cruelty, combined with securing Lucas in a loving home, gave me a sense of profound purpose. For the first time in years, I truly breathed free, the drama and chaos now behind me. Justice had been hard-won, but sweet. Lucas and I now walked in the light, the future stretching bright before us. In the months following the custody hearing, I received sporadic, threatening messages from Theo. He blamed me for destroying his life and swore I'd pay. I simply archived the messages in case they could be used as future evidence. Meanwhile, Theo's circumstances grew increasingly dire. His gambling spiraled out of control, racking up monumental debts. With no access to my savings anymore, he resorted to increasingly desperate measures. The day I received a call from his mother, I knew the reckoning had arrived. Arya, dear, I'm sorry to bother you, Evelyn began, sounding strained. But I'm afraid Theo's gotten himself into serious trouble. According to her, Theo had not only lost his job and declared bankruptcy, but had also resorted to theft from close family and friends to pay off furious bookies. His own parents had just filed a police report upon discovering $15,000 in heirloom jewelry missing from their home. My mind raced, wondering if any of my valuables had also been pilfered. As far as I knew, Theo had no idea where I'd moved to with Lucas. Still, unease crept down my spine. That night, I double-checked our door locks and windows. Lucas and I had created a peaceful sanctuary since escaping Theo's toxicity. I refused to let his desperate crimes disturb our new life. Sure enough, a week later, Evelyn called again, sobbing this time. Theo had robbed his own parents' home in broad daylight, While they were out grocery shopping, a neighbor spotted him racing down the street with bags of valuables. It was brazen, foolish desperation. The police soon caught up to him trying to hawk their stolen items at a pawn shop. I felt sick as Evelyn recounted how he'd screamed vicious obscenities at the officers, even spitting at them as they dragged him away in handcuffs. The Theo I'd known had descended fully into bitter madness, lashing out at the world as he faced the consequences of his cruelty. Some dark part of me whispered that he deserved this reckoning. But mostly I felt a profound sadness for the man he could have been, if not for the blackness in his heart. At Lucas's request, I arranged a supervised visit with Evelyn so she could see her grandson. They wept in each other's arms, two innocent souls scarred by Theo's degeneracy. It solidified my decision to move on fully, leaving Theo's darkness firmly in the past. A few months later, the final hammer fell. A short article in the local newspaper reported that former hedge fund manager Theodore Walker had pled guilty to charges ranging from theft to domestic abuse. He'd be serving a minimum 5-year prison sentence. I let out a shaky breath, the last cord tying me to Theo finally severed. He could no longer hurt us. "Mommy, are you okay?" Lucas asked, glancing up from his coloring book. I hugged him tightly. "Yes, baby, I'm more than okay." I smiled down at my sweet, resilient boy, who had weathered so much yet retained his shining spirit. We never heard from Theo again. I focused on giving Lucas the happiest, most secure childhood possible. Every day, we healed a little more. Years later, as I proudly watched Lucas graduate high school as valedictorian, I reflected on our journey. We had escaped toxicity and created a loving family from the ashes. The darkness did not win. In the end, love prevailed. Our scars made us stronger and brought us closer together. And though the road was long, we healed by walking it hand in hand. Lucas was, and always would be, my guiding light. The day I watched Lucas walk across the stage to accept his high school diploma, my heart swelled with pride. My sweet boy had blossomed into an intelligent, kind young man despite the cruelty he once endured. Seeing him grin as he clutched that hard-earned diploma stirred a profound mix of emotions: happiness, relief, satisfaction, and most powerfully, vindication. We did it, I thought. We survived the toxic storm and came out wiser on the other side. After Lucas's graduation ceremony, we went out to dinner with Evelyn to celebrate. She squeezed his hand, blinking back proud tears. "You did so well, Lucas. I know your parents are smiling down on you tonight." I swallowed the lump in my throat. She meant Theo too, of course. Evelyn had long forgiven her son's cruelty, but some wounds do not fully heal. After dinner, Lucas decided to head out with friends while Evelyn and I returned home. Settling on the porch swing with a glass of wine, I asked her delicately, "Have you heard anything about Theo lately?" She stared down at her lap. "He'll be eligible for parole in a year. I pray he's found some peace of mind after all this time." I hoped so too for her sake. People could change, but redemption required facing the past, something Theo had spent a lifetime avoiding. My phone buzzed and I glanced down. A text from Alicia read, "Did you hear? Jonah got arrested again." I quickly replied, "What happened?" Her response, "Caught vandalizing his high school gym." Third strike after all those bullying incidents years ago. I exhaled slowly. So his cruelty continued. "Jonah's been arrested again," I told Evelyn gently. She just nodded, unsurprised. Despite my bitter history with Theo and Jonah, I took no pleasure in their pain. But there were consequences to cruelty, a lesson I hoped they had finally learned. The bright spot was Lucas. Sheltered in a peaceful home, he grew into a thoughtful, intelligent man. The nightmares that once plagued him faded along with memories of his troubled childhood. Watching him thrive filled me with fierce pride. I had fought through hell to secure a loving, stable life for my son. The scars remained but shaped us with empathy and wisdom. Some nights, bittersweet nostalgia still washed over me. I would always mourn the happy family we could have been. But life was a winding road. The old saying proved true: when God closes a door, he opens a window. Though Theo rejected the light, Lucas and I walked in it proudly. By taking the high road, we broke the cycle of cruelty without sacrificing our humanity. After surviving the storm, we embraced a new dawn. The day Lucas left for college, we clung to each other weeping. "I'm so proud of you," I choked out. "Your strength inspires me every day." He squeezed me tight. I owe it all to my hero mom. You gave me my life back. Watching him drive away to start his own life chapter, my heart swelled with love and hope. The past was behind us now. A bright future lay ahead for Lucas, one he could shape with his compassion and integrity. The years flew by in a blur. Lucas thrived in college and beyond, forging his own path. He married a lovely woman who treated him with the kindness he deserved. When they had a son of their own, Lucas vowed to give his child the happy, peaceful childhood he had missed, but always deserved. The cycle of cruelty, dysfunction, and lies ended with our family. By taking the high road, we found healing. From the ashes, goodness grew. And so the story comes full circle. My son, once tormented, now has fulfilled his destiny as a loving father. And I, having overcome darkness, can rest knowing I walk in the light. Our scars healed because we face them together. Love prevails.